Recording in progress.
And get Sean in. Yep. Hello, everyone. This is Chuck Tirone, Reading's Conservation Administrator, pursuant to state legislation superseding certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, relating to the COVID-19 emergency. The May 24th, 2023 public meeting of the Reading Conservation Commission shall be physically closed to the public to avoid group congregation. The meeting shall instead be held virtually using Zoom. Please note that this meeting is being recorded. All materials for this meeting are available at the following link, which I will provide in the chat. Martha Moore, the Conservation Commission Chair, will facilitate this meeting. Please note that there are public comment period at the end of each hearing. Each vote taken during tonight's meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. We'll begin with a roll call attendance. Martha, can you please review, or can you please conduct the attendance? I guess I got to work on that part.
Sure. And this is the order that we will vote in our roll call vote tonight. So, Brian.
Brian Bowe, Vice Chair, present.
Bill.
Bill McCants, member present.
Andrew.
Andrew Driven, member present.
John.
John Sullivan, member present.
Walter.
Walt Talbot, associate member present.
And Martha Moore, Chair, present. Okay, we have somebody in the waiting room.
Okay. So Martha, I have on the script that you would go over the agenda, but I didn't tell you that before we started. Do you
That's right.
want me to? So
I can go
Martha,
over the agenda.
sure. Martha, can you please review tonight's agenda?
Thank you. I forgot about that, and thank you for reminding me. We have 3 hearings on the agenda tonight: 0 Small Lane, 2 Maple Street, and 16 Beverly Road. They have all requested to be continued. So the first thing we're going to need to do is vote for those hearings to be continued to June 14th. Then we also have Meadowbrook access easement vote. And then we have under old new business, 88 Glenmere Circle. And that's also going to be continued till June 14th. And then we have a request from Azalea Road. We have some violation notices and discussion items, including a discussion of the wetland regulations and 60 Terrace Park. And I believe that somewhere on this agenda, we're planning to hear from somebody at Veterans Way. And then we just have minutes for approval and Friends and Family Day at the end. Do you know, Chuck, where we're going to squeeze Veterans Way in?
Sure. So that can come up at any time, but it's the public comment section. It's not on the agenda. It was a last minute request to speak to the Conservation Commission at this meeting.
So how about if we do it right before old new business?
Yes, I don't recognize, it's Jacqueline Welsh. So if, when she gets here, we could, and we're at old new business, maybe that'll work, but we could pull it up, I guess, anytime until we start the review of the regulations. And then it would have to wait until after.
Okay. All right. And all of these public hearing continuations need to have a vote. Is that correct?
Yes, each one is different. A change from the last meeting.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Anything else before we get started?
No.
Okay.
Not from me.
So 0 Small Lane has requested to be continued to June 14th. Can I have a motion for that?
This is Brian Bowe. Make a motion to continue 0 Small Lane till June 14th.
This is Bill McCants. I second the motion.
Brian Bowe in favor.
Bill McCants in favor.
Andrew Driven in favor.
John Sullivan in favor.
Martha Moore in favor. Okay. And I just remembered, have we got a volunteer to do the minutes?
I volunteer.
Okay, Brian's gonna do the minutes.
On
And,
the on the expectation it's going to be easy.
okay, and I learned something at the open meeting law training that I went to perhaps yesterday. And when we are doing our meetings virtually, the minutes should say approved unanimously via roll call. If like a vote that we just took now. And then if there is not a unanimous vote, we should name the person who voted or people who voted in the minority. So when we're recording the minutes, that's a detail that I was not aware of, that I learned about at the open meeting law training. Okay.
Can I just say one thing in that regard? I was at that training as well, Martha. Just to reassure you, when I looked at a past set of minutes, for example, Andrew Driven happened to vote no on something and the rest voted yes, but that was noted in the minutes. So don't want people to be alarmed that this had necessarily not been done in the past. Thanks.
Yeah, but in the past, what we'd been writing is 500, and we're supposed to write unanimous via roll call.
Gotcha.
That was the clarification that I got at the training yesterday. Okay, 2 Maple Street has also requested to be continued. Do I have a motion for that?
This is Brian. Make a motion to continue to Maple to June 14th.
Bill McCants, I'll second the motion.
Brian Bowe in favor.
Bill McCants in favor.
Andrew Driven in favor.
John Sullivan in favor.
Martha Moore in favor. Okay, 16 Beverly Road has also requested to continue until June 14th. Can I have a motion?
This is Brian. I make a motion to continue 16 Beverly to June 14th.
It's Bill McCants. I will second the motion.
Brian Bowe in favor.
Bill McCants in favor.
Andrew Driven in favor.
John Sullivan in favor.
Martha Moore in favor. Okay, do we have any information about Meadowbrook easement?
The Meadowbrook easement is still not in the possession of the town of Reading. It's still being worked on by Meadowbrook. And I actually didn't even get an update from our town council this week. So I think it's kind of falling off a little bit, fallen to the side of other pressing matters, even for Reading.
Okay. And we still don't have anybody in the meeting except for members of the commission. So we hear that 88 Glenmere Circle is not quite ready for their certificate of completion request. I don't think we need a vote on that because it's under old new business. Is that correct?
That is.
Okay. And is there anything else under old new business that we need to tackle tonight?
Yeah, so I think that you'd want to mention Mr. Ghosh on Azalea Circle, because when you're extending a order of condition, there's a 30-day advance of it expiring. So I'd like to get that on the record to say that this request is 2700790 50 Azalea Circle has come in and requested a extension for 1 year, but during the site visit there was some issues that we would like to be cleaned up prior to discussing this item, and all the issues were not taken care of. And Mr. Ghosh contacted me yesterday afternoon and said that they had hired a company to do that, but they were having trouble getting to the site prior to this, this long weekend. And he thought that it would happen next week and he would be available for the next meeting on the 14th.
Okay. And so hopefully we will have gone out to see that the work has been done before the 14th and be able to vote for the extension at that point.
I'm going to say yes, but I'd like to hear what Bill has to say also.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're on the same page in terms of what this requester is supposed to do before we consider the extension. And I know that in writing you had mentioned a few of these things, but when several of us went on site, we saw that the silt fence was collapsed in several places. The wooden stakes, there'd been so much soil migration that some of them were almost at a 90-degree angle. Other things you had noted, such as gravel being beyond the limit of work. But we were really struck by what disarray the hay bales were in, and especially the collapse of the silt fence and the compromising of the wooden stakes, indicating a lot of soil migration, which might affect the resource area. So that's what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Anything else on that? All right. We also
No.
have violation notices. Are there any follow-ups on any of those?
No, there's
No.
not. We've put that on the back burner for now, trying to get back on track. But did do a site visit at 60 Terrace Park, but you'll hear about that a little later on. Jacqueline Welch may be this iPhone 2, so anytime if there's a spot for that, if you wanted to take care of that.
Yeah, I
Martha.
was going to suggest we find out whose iPhone 2, because we've now finished old new business and we're ready for discussion items. So this would be a good spot to stick in public forum comment if needed.
Jackie, are you on? Is that you?
Hi, yep, can you see the video? Or can you hear me at least?
We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, good. Hello. So I don't know, did you guys discuss, I thought this was an in-person meeting, so I'm actually in the parking lot of Town Hall. So did you guys discuss Lot 5 at all?
No, we were waiting for you to join us.
Oh, hello.
So this is perfect timing for you. We've just gone through
Great.
the all the hearings that have been continued, and we've gone through old new business, and we were hoping you would join us before we get to discussion items. So perfect timing. And I apologize that you went out in the rain and there was nobody at Town Hall. We're still virtual. We're still doing virtual meetings.
Oh, good. Okay.
Chuck
So you want-
has all of your paperwork that he can put up on the screen for us to see. If you want to tell us about what your request is.
Perfect. So I told the homeowners at Lot 5 that I would attend this meeting. And really, just it was to kind of hopefully be able to answer any questions regarding the site. But very simply, what they're trying to do is add a patio, extend the front walkway, which is outside the 100-foot buffer, and then from the patio, make a paver walkway back to under the deck. There's a door under the deck that leads to the unfinished basement. So the plan that you're looking at, the yellow line is the 100-foot buffer. Then you can see this is the where the foundation is, and that blue area is the proposed patio. And that's what they're looking to do. And Chuck had stopped by just at random, and this work was underway. And I guess the question is this a minor modification, or do we need some sort of a permit?
And just to clarify on this plan, the retaining wall, which is shown as a series of ovals, runs right along the 35-foot line. So everything you're proposing is outside the 35-foot line. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Bill McCants, you have your hand up.
Yes, I was wondering, what is the width of the path?
I think it's a 4-foot patio. I'm sorry, 4-foot walkway. And the front is 4 or 5 feet. But I think that back one's only 4 feet.
Okay. So this might be a question for the administrator. In the minor activities under the state regs, it's unpaved pedestrian walkways less than 30 inches wide for private use. That's a minor activity. Now, under the Reading bylaw, it just says installation of unpaved pedestrian walkways for private use and doesn't give a width, but as we all know, where the state regs, the town can't make the requirements less stringent than the state regs. It can make them more stringent. I realize that said, that with minor activities, there is some discretion. So is it a problem that these are going to be 48 inches when the state considers a minor project to be a private path that's 30 inches wide? And I guess I'd address that to Chuck as the administrator.
You know, I hate to do this, but I would just bounce that right back to the Conservation Commission. It's really going to be a decision that you make. I would say that we're using the minor project permit term incorrectly, unless I'm misreading you, Bill, because we have an existing order of conditions and we just want to make a minor modifications to that order of conditions. Sometimes called an amendment, but the commission wouldn't vote to have an actual amendment to the order of conditions. So that's what we're looking at, not a new permit. We have a permit on this property at the moment.
And thank you for that clarification. That actually makes more sense to me than if we were starting from scratch and this were a minor project. That's where I'd be concerned about the 30 inches for a private path. Thanks.
Brian?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I was out there with Chuck today. And another point here is that the path is going in on already disturbed ground. In fact, it's doubly disturbed because it was a house back in the day and now it's already prepped for lawn and what have you. So it's not a path on natural terrain at the moment. That's it, Martha.
Okay, and what is the patio going to be made of surface-wise? Is it permeable or impermeable?
It's made out of pavers, and I believe pavers can be either way, and that's just a matter of what kind of poly sand you put in between them.
Okay, so will there be enough space between them for water to infiltrate into the ground between the pavers then?
Yes, and actually, if you can see the front walkway, that recharge, the subsurface recharge system,
Mm-hmm.
that has a clean out, excuse me, that has a clean out, and are building the patio around that to have access to that clean out to get in there too.
So the clean out is inside the area that's colored in dark blue, or it's inside the walkway area?
It's about a 3-foot, like a 6-inch wide circle that has the clean out in there, and their subsurface is outside of all of this work that we're talking about here.
So where is the clean out located?
let's see, in relation, see the number 24 on the plan on the screen. It's roughly about 2 feet in, inside the patio. So the pavers will have this round, clean out top that they can pick up and access still.
Just about outside the 100-foot line there.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Brian?
Yeah, I actually have more of a comment, or two comments rather than a question. They both have to do with the letter that you sent to Chuck, Jackie.
Okay.
The first is in your description, you described the work as being under the deck. In reality, it runs alongside the house and ends at the deck, although down on the ground. So that's just a little detail. Something that I think is more of an issue is that in your letter, you also said you'd like this to get addressed so you can get back to work, when in fact, when I was there today with Chuck, work was going on. So it's clear that the work didn't stop waiting for the outcome of this conversation. So, I mean, to me, it's just, I don't appreciate that. Don't want to make a federal case out of it, but I wish that weren't in the letter. Martha, that's all I have to say, Martha.
Chuck, did you have anything?
So when I was out there on site, I guess I did a pretty poor explanation. When I was out there on site without Brian and then with Brian, I did say that they could continue putting the stone down.
Yeah.
And I know that they're doing work, but the pathway leading down to the back deck is separated by granite stones. And we were talking about, how hard it was to communicate what you're talking about, because I was thinking pea stone, not those stones. And it wasn't worth getting into that more work was done. But I didn't see any pavers, which I actually mentioned and told Jacqueline that I didn't want to see any pavers down. The pea stone was in the entrance on Veterans Way, and I could understand why that needed to be moved and why move it twice when you could just bring it into the building. The other thing that I wanted to mention is you were talking about pervious. The Conservation Commission in Reading has a detail that they usually use for pervious pavement, and it has a lot more to do with than just the top surface of pavers and the gap in between them. It's the substrate that would be amended with different types of granular aggregate and some landscape fabric. It ends up being about 18 inches to 2 feet of sub base for things to drain into. So although this is set up like it could be pervious, I don't think that we should call it that because others had to go to the higher standard.
Okay.
All right, Brian.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Jackie, I apologize. I apparently missed the boat on Chuck giving you approval to keep on working on the path. So
That's okay.
I shouldn't have jumped in there, and I apologize for that.
That's all right.
So I think the question that's before our commission. Oh, Andrew has a question.
I think I was just going to ask I'm a little confused about what our options here are, but I think you were just about to go there, so.
Okay, I believe our options are that we can direct Chuck to use his administrative approval to make a decision about this minor plan change, or we can ask Jackie to come back to our next meeting and put it on the agenda and consider it to be something that the commission needs to vote on, the proposed changes. I think those are the two choices. Is that correct, Chuck?
Yes, those two options are true. So the commission needs to, recognize that this is so minor in nature and has a lot to do with the existing project. And it's not a very big, or it's a small departure from what we approved, that it is a minor we don't have that, but a minor plan change, and that could be reviewed under administrative, under my review. So the other way, if that's not acceptable, then then we talk about amendments. And is it amendment that needs to go and be advertised and talk about, or is it an amendment that we just want to have a commission vote? And we can't do that tonight because it wasn't on the agenda. So that's where the second meeting would come in place.
So does anybody have strong opinions about whether or not we can allow Chuck to make the decision on this, or whether we need to have Jackie come back to the meeting on June 14th? Bill?
My concern was procedural in nature, and I feel it's been addressed. Understanding that this is an ongoing project, and looking at the information we have, as well as Chuck's comments and Brian's comments, I have no problem with delegating it to the administrator myself.
Anybody else thoughts on this? Do we need a motion and a vote?
Let me just show you what the site looks like. I have a pretty poor picture, but I think you can see it. That's what we're looking at here. Not a
So
very big paver area. The lawn area is torn up. Was never in that good a shape because of the material that was on top of it. But they're just going to straighten that out. Not a lot of regrading, and roll out sod. And then the pathway leads along the house and underneath the deck.
So, so the area that has a rake sitting on top of a gray pebbles,
Mhm.
that's where the patio will be?
No, yes, that's it. There's two rakes, but yes, the rake up to the left.
Yeah.
In the picture.
All right. Do we have a motion?
This is Brian. I'll make a motion to delegate authority to Chuck to handle this minor change.
This is Bill McCants. I second the motion.
Brian Bowe in favor?
Before we vote, can I just add one thing? Jackie, could you send me a corrected letter with the description that Brian asked for?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Would like to install a patio and a walkway to their area below the deck is how it reads. So would like to install a patio and walkway to, okay.
Brian, was that what you needed?
Yeah,
Just
I mean,
clarification on that language.
I would just have said alongside the house leading to the back deck.
Okay.
It was the under the deck part that just struck me first.
Alongside their house. Okay. To under the deck. Okay. All right, I can amend that.
Okay,
Okay.
can we start
That
the
note-
vote over again?
This is Brian, approve.
Bill McCants in favor.
Andrew Driven in favor.
John Sullivan in favor.
Martha Moore in favor. Okay, Jackie, thank you for coming.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. And,
And I just noticed that Tony's here.
right,
At the
welcome to
meeting.
Tony. Tony is also associate member of Conservation. Can you hear us, Tony?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Awesome. Okay, we've made it through the agenda up to the point of discussion items. And there was no actual action on anything until the one you were just listening to, which was added in as a public forum request by 5 Veterans Way. Okay. We have no correspondence, so the next thing on the agenda is regulation review and discussion. And this was brought up by Bill McCants.
Okay. So as we discussed at the last meeting, an interest in possibly making some modest clarifying amendments to the Reading's wetlands protection regulations. Chuck had advised that once we have this discussion, but before we can actually vote on any changes, there'd need to be proper public notice. So tonight is just for a discussion of some suggested language for folks to talk about. Other commissioners may have some other suggestions they'd like to make. Chuck, do you happen to have access to the document you sent around that has the write-up?
Yeah. Let me pull that up.
Appreciate that. Thank you. And while Chuck is doing that, just wanted to say that there are out of 351 communities in Massachusetts, all of which have had conservation commissions since the mid-'80s. According to MACC, over 200 of them now have bylaws of some kind. They vary greatly in length and scope. And this area that we're talking about having a bit more clarity on, protecting, we're giving increased scrutiny or protection to parts of the buffer zone is a very common item that a lot of towns have considered. All right, thank you, Chuck. So starting at the top, again, these are just modest proposals. Internal misnaming of the Reading's wetland protection regs. As you know, we all come with different expertise to the commission. Mine happens to be in law and regulation. And when matters go to court, the case law is consistent. Judges are not interested typically in what commissions do informally, but what is actually written in their bylaws and regulations. So having things as clear as we can in writing is to everyone's benefit, applicants, stakeholders, and of course, the commission. So that was the reason for cleaning up this internal misnaming. I'm sure it wasn't intentional, but there's no such thing as the Reading wetland regulations. It's wetlands, plural, and it's the Reading wetlands protection regulations. So these are not identified as alternate terms. So this is just a matter of light cleanup, cosmetic almost. The next one, Reading's wetlands protection regulations, section 3D4, zone of natural vegetation, we had talked about. Draft additional language. Now this draft additional language doesn't change anything. As we discussed at the previous meeting, there's flexibility. So for example, with the zone of natural vegetation, it's a minimum of 25 feet because there will be cases, and at a last meeting, vernal pools were mentioned as a situation where you need some flexibility case by case. So the suggestion here is the non-highlighted text is how it reads currently. but putting in the highlighted text, combining the minimum of 25 feet zone of natural vegetation as otherwise defined in this section 3D. That's important, that phrase is otherwise defined in this section 3D, because it keeps all the different parts of the regulations together. With the 10 feet or greater distance, notice the flexibility built in there. The total distance from the resource area may be referred to for the sake of convenience as either the 35-foot no disturb zone or the 35-foot no structure zone. Now, what behind this is clarity? It's simply that, as we know, a lot of applicants use these terms. We on the commission sometimes use these terms. It's convenient, but does it literally mean 35 feet? Not necessarily. It depends on the case. In some instances, the ZNV will expand. In some instances, that 10-foot area will expand. It depends case by case, but there seems to be, just based on practice over time, some interest in having this. And as noted here later, our commission wouldn't be unusual in this regard. If you could scroll up just a bit to the standard replacement tree and shrub policy. And
Bill, are
Brian-
we asking questions as?
yeah, I
I'll come
noted
back.
Brian had raised his hand, so please go ahead, Brian.
That actually was my question, on whether you wanted us to hold questions, comments or not.
Oh, no, please feel free
Okay.
to ask as we go along. So I've just gotten to the end of that section 3D4 proposal.
Right.
So if you wanted to say something about that now, please go ahead.
Yes, so the effect of what you've written is, it in essence extends the no disturb zone 10 feet further than it is in the current regulations.
Well, actually, Brian, there's no such thing as a no disturb zone in the current regulations. There's just a zone of natural vegetation. That's part of my point.
I agree.
I looked very carefully at the language. I got it right here. And all it talks about is a zone of natural, D1 talks exclusively about a zone of natural vegetation. And it says nothing else.
So what
so-
we would have to do is to alter our way of talking about this. Because we definitely talk like the first 25 feet is hands off. And then the next 10 feet is just no man-made structure as defined in the dictionary. So we would have to learn to speak to this. Not a bad thing, but that would be a discipline thing for us.
Maybe, but would you really have to change that much? That is to say, let's say you call it a 35-foot no structure zone. You've never allowed structures in the zone of natural vegetation. Then you have that additional 10 feet. So I'm wondering how much of a change it really is.
I don't know, Brian, if you're going to add to
No.
that, but I would add that I think the intent was that the 25 foot was not an area where you could work. But as you read through this and, I realized, and I've used it a little bit, that I guess I have told people that this area of 25 feet could be replanted with natural vegetation. And that's where we're at. So it's not a restricted area. Is that what people want in this area, or is it always hands off? Or is it hands off only when it's undisturbed areas?
And
So those are a couple things to think about.
right. And doesn't that get tricky, because there are some other towns that address the hot button issue of pre-existing non-conforming property. We have a lot of those, right? And there are some towns that actually say explicitly, we can require you to replace that 25-foot zone with natural vegetation. Now, a lot of towns don't say that. It seems to me the way Reading has written this allows for flexibility. I think that's why towns that are going to explicitly require it have to say so, because that's a pretty dramatic thing to require across the board. And even those towns that do say that use the word may, not shall. So I just wanted to put that out there.
I'm just going to point out that the paragraph that, or the sentence that Bill is suggesting we add really is not related to the zone of natural vegetation. It's related to the sentence in the beginning of this paragraph that says no new foundations, etc., shall be permitted within 10 feet of the zone of natural vegetation. And it just therefore clarifies that to be the 35-foot zone. And I know we have had a few people who brought us proposals and they drew in the 25-foot line and the 100-foot line, but they did not know we were looking for a 35-foot line. So I think that this highlighted in yellow area would make it easier for a applicant to know that they should also add a 35-foot line on their plans. And we don't have to ask them to go back and add it after the first meeting. So I like Bill's suggestion that we specifically have 35 feet spelled out rather than 25 and 10 in two separate things and not add them together explicitly.
And Martha, I appreciate you noting that this does not change the language of D1, 2, or 3 at all. It's just about D4. You're right, and I appreciate you emphasizing that.
Anybody else have comments on this section 3D4 before we move on?
I had one more.
Okay, and so I'll let Chuck go and then Andrew.
Oh, Andrew, so, I just wanted to make a comment that where he wrote for the sake of convenience. I thought that was a odd phrase to be left in the regulations, but
The reason for that, Chuck, thank you for highlighting that, is I wasn't sure how else to say it because it's not literally 35 feet. It can't be, because we leave ourselves flexibility for it to be more than 25, and we leave ourselves flexibility to be more than 10. So it's not literally a 35-foot zone. It never has been because of that built-in flexibility. Now, we may want, and you would know better how this works than I, once the commission agrees on the direction we're going in, and before we advertise for a public meeting on this to vote on it, maybe it should be run by town council. This kind of stuff usually is, even for minor modifications, but I don't happen to know what that process is, but town council may look at it and say, well, not for the sake of convenience, but what I want to say at this meeting is, for the sake of convenience was just about making sure nobody got the impression that it's always 35 feet, because it isn't.
we can run that past town council
Great.
before. Yeah, sure.
Okay, Andrew.
This is great, Bill. I appreciate this. I didn't even realize how confusing our regulations were, and I've just kind of learned from being on the commission. My only comment is that the way I'm reading this, the suggested sentence is it doesn't, I mean, I know it's legal writing, but it doesn't make sense to me easily. I know what you're saying. Maybe it's the combining the minimum of 25 feet with 10 feet or greater distance. Maybe it could be something like adding to the minimum an additional 10 feet or greater distance described herein. The total distance from the resource area may be referred to. And I agree with Chuck, you already said that may be referred to, so I don't think we need for the sake of convenience, but not a lawyer, but you have the may there, so we could, if you're not enforcing the 35 foot. But just I'm not liking the combining, I think. It's being very picky, but it just doesn't read cleanly to me.
So I would suggest, I'm not married to the sake of convenience. I've explained why that was there, so I'm happy with striking that. But I would suggest, Andrew, because I appreciate your perspective, is take out for the sake of convenience, but play with the language a little bit. And perhaps you could submit something for next time. We don't have a time limit on this, right? We're just trying to get more clarity for the community, but it's not as if it's going to change, how we're operating. So it'd be great to get a suggestion. But I think we're all on the same page. The reason this reads a bit awkwardly, and tweaks could help, absolutely, is we're trying to come up with something that puts the two together in the way that will help the public. And that wasn't done before. Even with my background, Martha had to help me understand. I said, new to the commission, new to all this, why do people keep referring to this 25-foot buffer and 35? I don't understand where that's coming from. And she suggested I look at 3D, and that's how this got started. So we're definitely on the same page and wanting to clear it up, but I think having lots of perspectives would be great. And I believe Tony has his hand up.
Yeah, thanks. In looking through section 4, part G, minor projects, item number 6, there is a reference to a 35-foot line. So I think talking about a 35-foot line in this context gives me a little better understanding of where that 35-foot reference comes from. But they don't talk about 25 plus 10 in that section. They simply refer to it as defining it as a 35-foot, basically a 35-foot line. Well, the text is located 35 feet from the resource area. So maybe there's a way we could follow that language and keep the language between both sections rather similar. Or possibly revising the text in section 6 so that 35-foot line is referenced equally in all sections.
That's good suggestion, Tony.
And I'm sorry, it's Tony, the numbering of that one is
4G6.
4G6, just so I can look at it later.
Yeah, it's on page 16.
Page 16, great, thank you.
And if for some reason an applicant had a reason it needed some flexibility in shortening those distances, that could still be obtained through the variance process. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Okay.
That's how we've used it. Especially the what we call the no structure zone. If they need to, other than cantilevering, but they need to be in the no structure zone, it's the variance process. And it's also only through a notice of intent, if anyone kind of picked that part up also. We've used either RDAs or NOIs in the past, but I think it's clear that the regulations are looking towards the notice of intent to do their variance process.
Okay, are we all set on 3D4? Can we move on to tree and shrub policy?
Yeah, just one last remark is, Andrew, when you're thinking about language, perhaps to propose for next time so that it reads more clearly to you, because, we're mainly communicating with people who aren't lawyers, always. If you could actually look at that 35-foot line language too, and maybe that'd be helpful to you as well. But that's all I had to say on this.
Sounds good.
Okay. Tree and shrub policy. Now, this was something I noticed when I came on the commission, that there was reference to this as if it were in the tree and shrub policy, and it isn't. And I think it should be. I talked about this a little bit with Chuck. And I think it, the commission had talked about it, understandably, because what's it all about? It's all about the closer you get to that resource area, the more vulnerable it can become depending on what you're doing in the buffer zone. And so here, just take due notice of the need to protect the integrity of the zone of natural vegetation. That language is straight out of the Reading regs. So that's not new language. As provided in section 3D, so that has everything. And adding number 5 is just about making sure that when people are looking at the tree and shrub policy, they're reading it consistent with the regulations, which should be the case anyway.
Any comments on that? I'm going to say we've had a couple of tree requests come before us, and we have specifically turned down requests to cut trees that were inside the 25-foot zone and allowed trees that were outside the 25-foot zone to be removed. But if that was added to our policy, the tree and shrub policy, then people might have not even requested the 25-foot zone trees because they could see that that was something we were protecting. So I think that makes sense to have that section in there.
Well, if I can say, I think it also gives us the benefit of defensibility. So if we do have a case where somebody asks for trees and we say no, this gives us something explicit to point to make it more likely that our decision stands. So I think this is a good plus.
And I know most or all of you know this, but just to put everyone at ease in case there's any concern, none of this upends what you've been doing, because everybody has the chance to appeal, and then the appeal period ends. I was actually found it somewhat entertaining when our wetlands circuit rider, who I think is excellent, in part 2 of the training, was talking about how the state noticed something that a town had done, but they noticed it after the appeal period. She said, so we throw up our hands, there's nothing we could do. So even the state, if they don't challenge within the appeal period, it's done. The pie is baked. So we're not upending anything here.
Bill, do you want to talk about your minor edit?
Yeah, that's just, I know this may seem picky, but it really isn't. When people go to court, they pick at all kinds of things, and they can claim, believe it or not, that if buffer zone is not capitalized, it means something different than buffer zone when it is capitalized. And even if you can ultimately prevail, it causes mischief, it costs money, etc. So it's just good to be consistent. And that's all that minor edit is about.
And then you say with only one exception, see below. So,
further down, that's on the next page. We're not there yet. It just means that even in the Reading's wetland protection regulations, buffer zone is consistently capitalized, except in one case, which I note further below, which we would also presumably correct so that it's consistent throughout. And that capitalized term buffer zone means the same thing everywhere it's used. That's all that's about.
and item 1 refers to the tree policy. Item 1 of the tree policy that we're changing.
Correct.
Okay. Any questions from anybody on what's visible on the screen right now?
Oh, well, I haven't gotten to the 3.0 yet. So.
Okay. All right. Go ahead, Bill.
Sure. 3.0, discharge of runoff into resource areas. And perhaps Chuck can help here. When I look at 3.0 with my background, I see a lot of stormwater language because it's talking about point source discharges, appropriate treatment, and so forth. Now, right before 3.0, there is a stormwater provision. My concern here is if read literally, let's say, we're not talking about a particular case tonight, there's no hearings, but let's say you had a homeowner who instead of discharging their roof runoff into a drive well, had a pipe that shot out into a wetlands area. That's a point source. and we'd have to apply 3.0 to it. But again, I don't think that was the intention. So I think this clarifying edit could be that just like the provision immediately before it, we say this is about stormwater. And the stormwater regs don't apply to single family homes. They never have. But that's why I highlighted this.
I
And
should raise my hand, but
Yep.
I think Tony has a comment. Maybe this will help before we all get into wordsmithing this. I think this was put in to capture the sump pump, the downspout that discharges causing erosion, and that's run towards the back. We had one last year where a person was putting in a paver patio with a drain in the center of it, and he didn't want it to discharge on his lawn. So he trenched all the way towards the back underneath the fence, and it discharged maybe a foot from the BVW. These are what the old commission, the 2011 commission, used this for, is to say that you can't do that. These are, they were trying to capture these situations. And maybe it's, needs to be said that I think during the winter time, I don't know the exact months, and spring, the DPW allows homeowners in Reading to discharge into the storm drains just through makeshift pipe coming out of their basement, so it can be run throughout. So if they don't have a storm drain, they're going to discharge it somewhere else, and sometimes that's right into the wetlands, and sometimes that causes erosion, and we really don't know where that water is coming from and what it's all about. So with that said, I guess Tony had a comment.
Tony?
Tony, did you put your hand down? Maybe
No,
you put
I,
his hand-
yeah, I thought I unmuted myself. Can you hear me now?
Mhm.
Yes.
Great. When I read this language, I also think of industrial discharges, particularly the references to temperature, oil and grease, and other toxic substances. Is that a concern in town, or was it a concern when this was last updated?
Yeah. Well, I think all those things exist in someone's basement. If it floods out and they're discharging all that into the wetlands, so, or they have a sump pump, I think that was a concern. I do remember one where they wouldn't, the 2011 commission wouldn't give a certificate of compliance until this discharge point was taken care of, and it went for a couple of years. So
But that was a sump pump.
it was.
Okay, not any specific reference or intention for an industrial discharge. Okay. Bill, I also had written in my notes here a question: if rainwater from a roof is considered a point source. So I'm glad we have the same thought, and I'm glad you've addressed that.
Well, I really haven't, Tony, because if we've got this 3.0, then why aren't we considering that? Is there some other town? I mean, stormwater regs don't apply to single family homes, but if we've got 3.0 for the reasons Chuck is saying, why doesn't it also apply to a discharge from a roof? That's a great question.
Well, and again, this is where an industrial discharge comes to mind. As you bring up, a single family home doesn't apply to a single family home. But if you have another structure or a commercial structure that tends to have, it may have an exhaust vent onto the roof, for example, where chemicals or other particulates would get deposited, that could probably end up in stormwater runoff from a rooftop. But I think if we're trying to say that this really isn't applying to a single family home, is that something that we could explicitly state in the language to make it clear to residents?
Well, but I think,
Yeah, we don't want that. That's,
yeah, Chuck is cautioning against that because there are situations where if a single family home is discharging the type of materials that your commercial property sometimes does, they're doing it out of their basement. I think the idea is the commission wants to have a tool in its local regs that it can use. I get that, but then why aren't we also applying this to roof runoff from a single family home that comes down to a point source that discharges into a wetland? It's not chemicals from the basement, but it is
Right.
coming off that rooftop.
well, it's true. And I don't know if you, I don't know, maybe Tony, you know how the copper gutters aren't allowed within so many feet of a vernal pool? There's something right there that could be thought about. Again, I wasn't part of this, but this always meant to me, we're capturing what the homeowner is allowed to do, but they have to do it appropriately.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, well, this was really just a thought exercise with three. As you saw, I personally didn't suggest an edit, but I've learned a lot just in talking about it. So
Maybe we can think about that. Everyone can think about that for the next meeting, and if there's any changes needed.
okay, for the commentary, I think it's useful to see how much support we have for protecting the zone of natural vegetation and the additional 10-foot or more buffer. The wetland, some people sometimes forget it's not just localities, that the principle is in the Wetlands Protection Act. The potential for adverse impacts increases with proximity to the resource area. We know this, but I think it's useful sometimes to remember it's in this, that principle is in the state regs as well. And then of course the MICC buffer zone guidebook, which is, I think, just excellent. The 2019 one has a lot of good peer-reviewed science-based recommendations in it. As you know, we sometimes have applicants that say, everything seems fine to me. I don't know where all this is coming from. It's worthwhile to be able to say, well, there's a lot of scientific studies have been done on this. And, the idea being, if you, the applicant, have other information you want to share of a similar nature that points in another direction, we, the commissioner, are happy to hear that. But it's important for us to remember how much support there is out there that isn't just anecdote, but good science. And then, as we discussed previously, other inland North Shore communities that take the same approach. This next part, again, is just a thought exercise. It's not part of our current modest regulatory amendment process, but because some commissioners have expressed interest in thinking more broadly about how the term structure might be defined beyond the dictionary definition. And I mean, Chuck knows this, but I tell you, as an attorney who does regulation, that's exactly the right approach. If the regs don't define it, you go to the dictionary. Even the Supreme Court does this. So that is always the fail-safe. But if you want to define it further, there's things to think about. So you see section 2J there, maintenance of existing developed or landscaped yards or structures within the buffer zone that does not result in any net loss of native vegetation or permanently alter the soil other than for planting of vegetation is exempt from filing under the Reading Wetland Regs. You'll see I have highlighted in yellow there, the minor edit. This is the only one of 17 instances in which buffer zone is not capitalized. So just suggesting it be capitalized, but that's low-hanging fruit, that's easy. So you see, again, this is just a thought exercise. This suggests a hypothetical no disturb standard with the term disturb defined as permanently altering the soil other than for planting of vegetation. And again, just as a thought exercise, such a definition might, keyword might, have arguably encompassed even the placement of a bench, as in the 2022 Linfield case that the commission had recently discussed. So that's purely food for thought. not suggesting we make such a revision now. And then I just wanted to put in writing for you some things that were alluded to last time from the Town of Reading zoning bylaw, how it defines structure and development. So again, we have the dictionary definition. That's always our default, but this gives some interesting alternatives. And then if you could scroll up just a bit, the Stoneham wetland regs, they talk about their intent to move all structures and activities as far away as possible from any resource area, but then strictly regulates the use of wall type foundations and open pile foundations. As you know, when people talk about sheds, as we know, come up a lot naturally. They'll talk about the foundation of that shed. Well, you know, it's not a full foundation. It's just going to be here's called an open pile foundation. But for example, in Stoneham, they say, even if it's open pile, we don't want it within 35 feet of the resource area. So again, just food for thought. So I think number 2 is separate from number 1. Number 1 is about the draft, the modest draft proposal, proposed amendments to the regs. So any other comments on that before we move on to this other matter? Doesn't look like it.
Yeah.
So as an action item for next time, Andrew and anyone else who, based on our discussion today, has some proposed language. Again, my understanding is we would have further discussion on this at this part of the meeting. And only when we were all satisfied with our draft language would we have as appropriate Chuck run it by town council as needed. And we wait for feedback. And only then, when everyone was content, would we move ahead to the advertising? Because of course we don't want to spend that $300 prematurely.
Bill, I had a question, it just came to mind. What usually comes up with developers and their consultants when they come in, and engineers, I would say, I don't know where they get this from, but they do not consider a driveway a structure. And so for us, it's a big deal. And so we want to remember that's the most reoccurring question, that a driveway, are you serious? But on the other hand, when it comes to a fence, which is a structure based on the Webster's Dictionary, we do allow that usually on existing lawn. And, you know, as long as it's not in the wetlands and you can't cut down any trees to install it. So just a little more food for thought there.
Right, and other food for thought, which was interesting. Martha, I think you may have been at part 2 of the riverfront training.
Yes, I was.
Yeah. So I thought it was very interesting. By analogy to what we're discussing now and what Chuck just brought up. Is it Alicia? Is that her name?
Yeah, Alicia
Galen?
Alicia, yeah, she's I really like her presentation style. She's very approachable. But anyway, she was saying for certain activity in the riverfront area, you talk about restoration, mitigation, and is the soil degraded? And so then she talked about lawn. And she said, you don't get credit for restoration or mitigation by installing lawn. However, the presence of turf lawn does not mean degraded, she said, because there's soil there. So it's not that lawn has no weight at all, but on the other hand, it can't be used for to say, well, this is restoration, this is mitigation. It's just not degraded. So that goes back, Chuck, to what you were saying about a driveway, even in the way the state looks at it, a driveway it's covering up soil permanently. And the state sees a distinction between that and, for example, even having turf lawn, and that makes sense to me. So why wouldn't
Yeah.
that be a structure in that sense?
So I
So I'm
always
gonna
get the,
suggest we might add driveway specifically as an example where we're giving examples of structures that have foundations. Also include driveway as an example of a structure. Up in the upper part of this discussion.
Oh, right. In other words, if we go back up to,
The 35-foot line.
right,
or previous.
you want to
page.
go up the first page.
oh, okay, yeah.
Mhm.
So I think, Martha, what you're saying is that section 3D4, it gives no new foundations, including footings, frost walls, or other in-ground structures. And you could put including driveways, comma. Is that what you're saying, Martha?
Yep. I was thinking we add driveway right into that list because a lot of people look at that and say footing, frost wall, oh, that's a particular category of structures. So if we added driveway, then people would be more clear before they get in front of us that we're really thinking driveway counts as an in-ground structure.
Yeah, and the in-ground structure also, I guess driveway does have substrate, so.
Yep. It's in ground. And just to reiterate something I said last time, but it bears repeating, that word including is very meaningful to courts because some applicants who've gone to court to challenge commission decisions have tried to limit to here we have footings, frost walls, or other in-ground structures. And the court says, no, including means these are examples. Because if they were all that counted, the word including would have been superfluous.
Mhm.
But it was put there on purpose to show these are examples and they're not exhaustive.
So someone drew a conclusion that these are kind of, substantial structures, frost walls and, structures, what does it say, footings, frost walls. And then we said fence is a structure, or a shed under 200 square feet is a structure, and these were above ground, or they would permit them so they would be above ground. So do we need more of a diversity of examples in that area? Would that help, or is it not needed?
I would suggest, based on my reading of other bylaws in other towns, that you would benefit from further examples. Martha has said driveway, but you can think about the commission's experience over the past few years, because again, this is about clarity. We're not expanding jurisdiction here. We're just making it clear to the community, clearer to the community by giving additional examples. I don't think that's a substantive change. It's just clarity by giving more examples when this was never an exhaustive list in the first place.
We've got
Okay.
hands raised. Let's start with Tony.
How would this language address something as simple as a swing set that has, some extensions that go down below the ground surface and are cemented in concrete to give stabilization? Would that count as a footing? And would this language prohibit something that's rather uninvasive?
So I can just let you know that has come up many times, and that is considered a structure that has to have a judgment by the Conservation Commission.
Is that something that we really need to regulate?
So back in the day, I don't know if we're all back in the same day, but back in the day when it was just a tripod and 4 posts into the ground, that that seems to be something that is very temporary. But now we have these monstrosities that the first thing they do is they make a kind of like a surrounding framework and fill it in with sand or mulch, and then they start putting their structures on, their swing sets on top of it. That's the swing set of, now, of today. And so I would say swing sets absolutely have to be looked at. But for the commission, there's a process when they come in. To me, I think about these things, and if it is just a simple swing set, no, it's not an issue at all. But I don't know how to write that into the regulations.
Yeah. Brian,
Yeah, I have a different comment, but first, as far as the swing set, we kind of use the same principle when there's a trampoline that's too close. The idea being there's often something underneath it, pea stone or something, and so it is more impactful. So we do consider that's a structure and often ask the homeowner to move it. So for swing sets, I agree with Chuck. It can be impactful depending on what it is. We may or may not say remove it now. It's also more likely we might say when the children grow up, please move it. So that was just something on the swing sets. I wanted to go back. My main point was about this idea of adding more explicit examples. So in my experience with regulations, what you should try and do is have some overarching principle, if you will, and then have a few examples just to bring the people's minds to it. But the overarching principle should be easy to understand. For example, we've been talking about a number of these things, Bill, where it has to do with the soil being covered. So the driveway, the soil is covered, just like recently we decided that a deck over a piece of property, because it has slats, it doesn't count as an improvement because that soil still is not available for natural vegetation growth. So if we could think of that kind of a language where we define these things as things that affect the ability of the soil to grow natural vegetation, such as, I only give one or two examples, or including, to use your magic word. I think that way we get out of the risk of doing longer and longer lists, which then would prompt people to say, but this one thing is not on the list. So if the general principle is clear and a few common examples, then I think we should avoid a long list.
If I can respond to that, fair enough. That makes sense. That was part of the information given for future thought. However, for this amendment round, which was intended to be modest and clarifying, I think it would be different. Giving a few more examples here, and the commission will obviously decide in draft form how many and what we're comfortable with. Whereas I think that redefining what no disturb means, which is sort of what I interpret you talking about, covering the soil and so forth. I think that's a bigger change than we had in mind for this first round. I just wanted to offer that.
Well, I agree with that. And I'm fine for now, under the aegis of doing relatively minor changes, of adding one or two. My point is more, in the long run, I think we should strongly resist a Christmas list.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah.
Can we let Andrew in now? Andrew,
I'm just, unfortunately, reading these things really does raise a lot of questions. So, and Chuck kind of covered it, but we're really questioning this no new foundations within the zone of natural vegetation. And I do have to wonder why it says foundation specifically, not structure. Like no new structures, but it would be nicer, as Brian was saying, rather than being a negative statement, like what is our intent behind this zone of natural vegetation? What are we trying to do here? It would be, so as we rethink this, if we ever get back to it in a bigger scale, I would like to rephrase that one. And then getting back to, so as it's phrased, it really seems like you should put a play structure, but as I was going to say to Tony, if you've seen what the damage my 6-year-old can do, if you give him a swing set next to a zone of next to some trees and things that we don't want altered to, you would be surprised at what he's capable of doing. So I do think we'd have to be careful with allowing these play structures, because the parents are purposely putting them back there so they're not destroying their backyards. So we have to be kind of conscious of, not only are these structures getting bigger and better, but kids can be destructive. So we don't necessarily want to push them back to the buffer zone if we can avoid it. But it's not phrased that way. No new foundations does not seem to include, it would be bizarre if you said no new foundations, including a play structure, which don't usually have, or specifically a swing set. But no one installs swing sets anymore. They're always bigger than that. Yeah, so that's my thought. No new foundations is kind of an odd turn of phrase. And is a driveway a foundation? Not really.
Yeah.
But isn't it an in-ground structure? It's not. It covers the soil, but it does. Most driveways do a lot more than just cover the soil. You dig them out, you can see they. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, so that's, rather than saying, can we just change? Is this a modest change? Rather than saying no new foundations, just say no new structures, including footings, frost walls, driveways, or other in-ground structures? Or is that becoming a major change? Because if you say no new structures and we include driveways, it seems fine. You could even then include, however we define structure, but we're throwing this word foundation in there, which doesn't really mean anything.
I personally would say, Andrew, because structure is already part of the definition, that wouldn't be a major change, as long as you don't take out, you keep in. I'm just trying to understand. Okay, so protect the integrity of the zone of natural vegetation, including the associated root system and canopy. That's important, right? That gets at the principle of what we're trying to do. And then it's, if we cut out no new foundations, it says,
Oh, just
no, we would say instead, no footings, frost walls, or other in-ground structures shall be permitted. So that's how it would read with that out of it. I don't think it's a major change, again, because structure's there already, but
that would be losing that including word, and I think you were absolutely right. We need to keep that including. So
absolutely, got to have
I
it
was
to protect
no new
ourselves.
structures, including, etc., and then add sheds and play structures along with driveways, I think would be a good thing. But I would also say we should wordsmith this offline and come back at our next session with suggestions, so people can think about their suggestions and feed them back to Chuck, maybe.
Mm.
In addition, I will be happy between now and June 14th, in the spirit of this, to have a broader look at bylaws from other towns to see, because so many of them do focus on this, how they happen to approach it, to see if we might get some ideas that way.
That'd be great. Okay. Is there more at the bottom of your document that we haven't gotten to yet?
One other item, but it's not related to the amending of the regs. It's number 2. It's a separate issue that came up last time. So if there's nothing more on amendments, I can go to that.
Yeah.
Okay. this was something that Brian very helpfully highlighted last time. And it's, what do we do in these frequently encountered situations when we go out because there's an RDA or an NOI and we find out that they've already done unpermitted work in the buffer zone? They should have filed an RDA. And if they had, maybe an NOI wouldn't have been required. This is from the MACC Environmental Handbook. The regs state any work proposed in the 100-foot buffer zone must be reviewed by the commissions, obviously, if it's not a minor project. So the commission's right to consider the unpermitted work to be a violation is clear, but you'll notice the MACC, understandably, doesn't say, so let's just call it a violation and go to enforcement. Instead, it says, the action the commission takes once it's reviewed the work depends on the activity in the site. It should consider the proximity of the work to the wetlands resource area, of course. And after the fact filing of a notice of intent is usually appropriate and may be all that is required to bring the site into full compliance. Occasionally, some remediation is required and be worked into the filing. Failure to comply with an after the fact DOA or OOC can then be enforced as per usual. Conservation commissions are often tempted to overlook buffer zone enforcement issues or to permit them after informal review. But that's not recommended by MACC because of problems of a lack of clarity or the establishment of precedent, but they may be appropriate in some circumstances. What I liked about this is, as Brian noted last time, it can be difficult, sometimes bordering on impractical, when you're focusing on this RDA or NOI, and you're looking at the site and you discover, oh, here we go, unpermitted work. What do we do here? And I think MACC provides a practical suggestion, and after the fact filing. Then it's on the record, and we can do the usual things we do in terms of permitting. We can require some remediation as appropriate, perhaps in the overall project. What we're going to ask as part of the the conditions we attach to the application before us will take care of any remediation that we'd want as a result of this previous unpermitted work. But personally, I like the idea of there being a record and yet not necessarily requiring the enforcement process. So I just wanted to put that out for discussion.
Okay, any comments on that?
Yeah, I have one. Very glad you found that, and it makes 16 Beverly a whole lot more interesting. That was
Okay.
it, short and sweet.
Anybody else? Okay,
If not, that's it for me, Martha. Thanks.
All right.
so that was discussion item B. Discussion item C is our site visit that we went out to Terrace Park to see the condition of the dog fence. Brian, do you feel like sharing what we saw there, or Chuck?
Sure, I will, and then Chuck can point out everything I'm wrong in.
Mhm.
So Chuck, Martha, and I went out. We walked to the site where Martha had originally seen a dog fence, visible fence, wire that was either on or next to or near the path that goes through that area off of Veterans Way. And so we found the location of where it was. We were behind the house that Martha had identified in the past. We couldn't find the wire right away. Then we noticed that there were, the little flags they put in the ground along the line of invisible fence. We found those. They were back further off the trail, but still well away from that homeowner's property. We estimated in some cases, as much as 40 feet or 50 feet encroachment onto the town land. There's a stone wall that borders their property. So as we were looking for the wire, we found the flags. Strangely enough, after scuffing the ground in a number of places, we never did find the actual wire. So I don't know what that means. Maybe it's their idea of a prank, I don't know, but the flags are still there. In looking around, we also saw a number of violations, such as a piece of the wall had tumbled down and there was a lot of grass clipping thrown through that opening in the stone wall. Further down, there was a large pile of pea stone that had been put over the wall. Additionally, there were three, four large piles of brush, of branches that were also on town land that had most likely come from that property. So in the end, we found the flags were still further in than they should have been. We found violations along the stone wall, going into town property. And I think I'll stop at that point, and then Chuck can bring us up to date on his conversation with the engineer, and Chuck, that you talked with about this.
Sure, yeah. So it needs to be said that this land is not conservation land. It's not held by the Conservation Commission. It's town land. And for most of the violations, although off in the distance in this picture is Kirchian Woods, and on that side, there was some yard waste, not as much as what we found on the town land side or where this picture was taken. And there was also flags from the dog fence. So it's an interesting problem because not being conservation land, it's the town land, but the authority is not the engineering department or the DPW. So it was suggested that we talk to Matt Cronellis about what we saw out there and see if something can be done about this. But the picture you're looking at is all the pea stone, and you can see that there's probably 25 feet of it filled up a lot. The other side of the stone wall is completely buried. And in the background on the upper right-hand side, you can see, not clearly, but the light area, there's a lot of grass, and then there's some, black area, and that's soil. So this work just happened. We sent the letter 2 months ago. So they were aware that people were walking through talking about the dog fence, and now this is what we have here. I don't know how to proceed with this other than to talk to Matt Cronellis about what the town might want to do with this property and with this dumping situation. I know dumping is covered in the town bylaws and it's enforceable by the police department. Certainly on town, town land, capital T. It would probably be something that the police could look into. I guess it all starts with Matt Cronellis.
And towards that end, Chuck had suggested that it might work better if Martha and or I talked with him as opposed to Chuck, just to get it from the commission. I'm fine doing that. We talked about ways that he might introduce us, but that's actually to the side for now.
Okay, and Walter has his hand up, but I just want to make a clarification. The reason I knew where this fence was Kathy Kelly, the chair of the Trails Committee, took me in and showed it to me after they had laid out and cleared a path for a trail on this property, and the trail was put in because of the development at Veterans Way. It has room for 3 cars to park and a trail accessing this town land. So that's after the access point was created on Veterans Way. That's when the Trails Committee went in and laid out a trail in this property, which we now had access to. And that's when they ran into the dog fence. And Kathy took me out and showed it to me. So then I showed it to Chuck and Brian, only it doesn't seem to be across the trail the way it used to be. Okay, Walter. Oh,
So
go ahead.
sorry, the only thing that I would add to that is the trails inside this area existed. Their only new trail is probably connecting Veterans Way, the end of the cul-de-sac, to where the first trail kind of ran through. This is always an area where mountain bikers used and whatnot. So the trails beyond the first stone wall that you encounter for about 20 feet was the only thing that was just put in.
That was not what I understood from Kathy Kelly. I must be mistaken. Okay.
Yeah, the trails were there.
Yeah. All right, Walter.
The way these fences are installed is first of all, you shouldn't see the wire. It should be below ground. And where the flags are should be 3 to 5 feet. So the dog stops when he sees the flag rather than keep going and get zapped.
Ah, useful to know.
Yeah, that's helpful.
So the flag is 3 to 5 feet closer to the homeowner's property than the actual wire.
Yes,
Okay. And the wire should be buried under the ground.
that's correct.
Okay. Because
Any idea how deep it's buried typically?
Not very deep, 3 to 6 inches.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just so it's basically so nobody will trip or squirrels or something chew on it.
mhm. When Kathy showed it to me, it was not buried underground where it crossed the trails and crossed the stone wall. It was under a little bit of leaf litter, but certainly not 3 to 6 inches deep. So that interesting.
Oh, it had just been laid out and not buried yet. Of course, the issue we still don't have an answer for is how did they cross the stone wall?
Right.
There was no sign of any disturbance where they might have undone a piece of it, put the wire down, and then put the stones back. So that's still a mystery within an enigma or within a puzzle, or whatever Churchill said.
Okay. All right. Any other comments about this issue? Questions?
So, yes, so Martha, are you and I going to contact Matt about this and have a conversation? Does that make sense to you?
Sure.
Okay,
Well, I'll send the email like we discussed, Brian, and just put you and Matt on it, and then you could take the conversation from there.
right. So the idea is he'll say, Matt, here's this issue. The chair and vice chair would like to speak to you about it. And so the email was just an intro email. And then it's up to you and I, Martha, to reach out and take it further.
And Matt could certainly not be the right person to talk to, and you'll have to chase that down a little bit.
Place to start.
Okay. All right. Next on the agenda is the DPW Conservation Monthly Meeting, and it's scheduled for June 6th. I'm just checking my calendar. I have no conflicts that day, so I can certainly go to that meeting. Brian, are you planning to be there?
Yeah, I have it on my calendar. I think it's a very auspicious day, so it's a good time to show coordination like they had back in 1944.
Okay. All right. Anybody
You
else
have to
who,
recognize that's both a World War II reference and a Churchill reference in the same conversation. It's a good day.
got that, Brian? Anybody else would be welcome to join us. If you are interested, just let Chuck know so he can send you the link for the Zoom for that monthly meeting.
Or if you are driving around town and you see something, work that you didn't know about, DBW is doing, or something the DBW should take care of, send those to us. We usually just discuss ongoing jobs, upcoming jobs, and infractions.
All right. Moving on to administrators report, friends and family day discussion. Oh, Bill?
Sorry, Martha, just before we leave discussion items, Chuck, if the part 2 slide deck doesn't show up, reasonably soon, would you mind checking back with Alicia about?
Sure.
part two?
So if they send it to the commission, I didn't attend that meeting. It didn't work out for me. I'll be attending the one next week. So if you guys want to wait, when I get that slide deck, she may not
Absolutely.
send it to me because I wasn't there.
Yep. And I don't want this to be awkward, but I just want to say for the record, we are very, very fortunate to have someone as capable as Chuck as our administrator. I just wanted to say that for the record. Thanks.
And for the record, he is now a recognized
Oh my
wetland
God.
expert, as written up in a newspaper, so it has
It was, yeah, well, I actually appreciate that after so many years that somebody actually told someone what the deal is. So, which is great. And Bill, I appreciate that. I cannot wait to be drinking a beer this weekend, thinking at how glorious my life has become.
Okay,
What
now moving
newspaper
on
is
to
it?
friends and family.
Read this newspaper article.
Yeah, it was in the Chronicle, and they kept referring to a wetland expert, and it took having to go to the second page to the halfway through the last page of the article before they actually named the wetland expert, and it was Chuck Tirone.
So what I'm hearing is nothing came to mind when Martha was reading this paper.
Actually, Andrew, if you want to read
Yeah,
it, I think
she's
Chuck
like,
has about a dozen copies that he's collected by now.
I knew nothing about
I
it.
won't say nothing came to mind when I was reading about it. I kept looking for the name and wondering why they weren't naming Chuck, and they finally did.
There you go. You can be chair more. Yeah, Miss Moore.
Okay.
So, all right. No, it was a surprise. Well, okay. So let's move on.
Friends and Family Day takes place on June 10th, starts at 10:30 and ends at 3. And I thought I had all day to be there, and then I have a conflict has come up, which would mean I could be there to set up and stay till 11:30. Don't know if I'd be back in time to close up at the end, but I can try. Brian, you have a computer that you're going to bring and have some information on the computer.
Yeah, I have a presentation.
And are you still available to be there the bulk of the day?
Yeah, I'm planning to be there most, if not all, of the day. I imagine I'll need a quick break at some point, but I'm planning to be there most of the time.
I should be able to make it. It always is, just like what happened to Martha. It kind of happens to me, but the kids are grown now. So I can be there also, Brian, and you can get that break through me. And I know that Bill, something came up, but Andy, did you say that you might have some time for us on that day?
I've got some kids' activities right like from 11 to 2. So I might be able to sneak over after 2, just at the end, and then help clean up or whatever needs to get done. But I just have to see what's going on that day. But I do know I have some commitments from 11 to 2.
Okay. All right. Anybody else available or interested in helping out that day?
I'm good.
You
All
could
right,
come.
Walter.
Okay.
I'm
I
gonna be out
can,
of town that day.
I
so-
can fill in wherever you miss a gap or something.
Well, if you came from 11:30, that would be good. You could take over when I leave, and then we'd have at least 2 people there at all times, and Brian and Chuck wouldn't have to be there the whole time. That would be helpful. Would that work for you, Walter?
When does it end?
It ends at 3.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
if you came at 11:30 and stayed for a couple of hours, Andy might be able to be there by 2.
You're in my calendar.
All right.
So Brian and Martha's going to go early at 9. Is that when it starts, or 10?
It starts at 10:30, but we would want to get there a little before that to set up. So I'm thinking setting up at 10.
So
So
are we
10.
setting up or are they just providing the,
So there'll be a table and a tent and electricity behind you. So you have to bring whatever you're passing out and your computer.
right, but that table and the tent will be already set up, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought.
I think you might want to bring a chair or so.
Oh, yeah, maybe a cot.
Okay. Um,
So,
And-
and you're gonna go till 11:30.
I can be there till 11:30,
That's when Walter gets there.
and it will be in the Birch Meadow playground field area, somewhere along Birch Meadow Field.
And it's gonna be more exciting this year because I think that the Imagination Station parking area is out of commission.
Oh,
So they
and
won't be finished that job.
And speaking about that, Chuck, how are they gonna use the field? Because they have that temporary fence up all the way around, right?
I can look into that tomorrow. I don't know. They're either gonna finish it up and that's not gonna be an issue, but I doubt that.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I'd be
Yeah.
surprised.
Well, the field was in use today for small children playing baseball type games. So the parking area is fenced off, but the baseball diamonds are available. And I think it's more or less where the baseball diamonds were that they've had it set up before.
Yeah, when we walked by, we saw an access point up on the road near the entrance to Imagination Station where that used to be. There was a little place you could go through the fence, but all along the road, there was a fence, and all along the skating area, there was a fence. So there wouldn't be access from all sides. They may change that. They may take down a piece. I don't know.
We
Hmm,
should ask that. There's a meeting tomorrow at 11,
okay,
so maybe that'll come up.
yeah,
I was there this morning, and there's just kind of the fence where the path is going to be is fenced off, and then Imagination Station is fenced off. But I think the ball field and the skating rink are not.
Hmm.
Those are accessible from Birch Meadow Drive.
yeah.
Yeah.
That was what I saw when I was there today as well.
Okay, so maybe we're just having a descriptions passing in the night, because yes, the skating rink area is open, but there's a fence, that runs along that side where that shed is. They're gonna take down that cinder block shed. So that's all fenced. So the interior, you can't
the-
get
the-
to that.
The fenced off part is a skinny little strip where the walking path is going to be.
Yeah.
That's fenced off, and that kind of goes between the baseball field and the skating rink. But all along Birch Meadow Drive is not. You can get into either one of those from Birch Meadow Drive. You just can't get between the two
Hmm.
without going out to the sidewalk and around.
I will take your word for it. And if you're wrong, I know where you live.
Yeah. Yeah, so when we came out of that skinny little area where the CMU building was and turned right, we were following a fence all the way down until we got to the Imagination Station parking lot area. And that inside that area was completely fenced off also. As a matter of fact, the guy said he had to grab his keys to let us in the other area, and there was no way around it. We'll find out, it's just a question tomorrow I'll just get to it.
Yeah, well, it may be that everything has to be set up down at Castine Field rather than in the area closer to the Imagination Station. But I mean, I was there today at 5 o'clock and kids were walking around with their softball mitts and,
Mm.
and going from parked across the street from the elementary school and going into the field down at that part, you know,
Mm.
so.
Okay.
And there's generally been a fence along Birch Meadow Drive near where the water fountain is, but there's been a way to get in beyond that fence closer to the Castine Field end.
Okay, well, either way, it's a question for Chuck's meeting tomorrow, whatever, so we'll find out what the great minds think.
Okay. All right.
All right.
So Chuck, I have it on my to-do list and I haven't done it yet to look for the postcards that we had left over and the brochures about invasive species that we had last year for the Town Forest Day and for the Friends and Family Day. And I think you had printed a bunch of those. And I think we had a small pile left over, but do we want to print some more of those postcards that I think Andrew made the postcards and my students made the invasive plants brochures a number of years ago?
Okay. Yep. Print some more out.
That would be great. And if I find mine, I will bring them. But if not, I will certainly bring some activities for kids to do at the table so we can attract them over and talk to their parents.
Yeah, and we already worked on a big town map that shows all the green spaces, all the open spaces, and all the trailheads and some of the trails. So that's new. People will see at least 4 or 5 new trails. Lynetta Lane would be one of them. This trail entrance that we have over at 443 Haverhill Street is on it. And that's all I can remember right now, but there's a few more. Looks very similar to what's there on the map library, but it has been updated.
And is that a poster size that you're going to have one example of at the table for people to look at?
Yeah, it's going to be poster size. Yep.
Okay, cool. Anything else anybody suggests we should have at the table? You were talking tattoos. Did you find any of those temporary tattoos?
Yep, we have those ordered. So there'll be tattoos for people that want to grab a few frog and salamander tattoos. And maybe I added some spiders too, because those are just great. So
shall I bring a jug of water and kids can put the tattoos on when they pick them up?
sure.
Okay.
Yeah, tattoos seem to be a big draw, no matter what they are. And then we were going to do a raffle or something like that, so we could get people's name and addresses and let them know that we were going to we want to put it on a list and we would be contacting them.
Yeah. I would be happy to just have a clipboard with paper and people can write their name and address on the paper. I don't feel it needs to be a raffle. It's a lot easier to enter names into the computer if they're not all on separate little scraps of paper. Or we could have a computer where people could type their names in at that moment. Anybody have any thoughts?
Well, there's an advantage to your idea with the clipboard in that you don't have to worry about somebody feeling they were fooled into giving their name. This way it's very clear. The sign up sheet is so we can have some contact information. So I think it helps from that perspective. I just don't know if that encourages people to sign up whereas a raffle probably would, depending on what the what was raffled off.
Okay.
So basically, I came down on both sides of that, in case you hadn't noticed.
Mhm. Yeah.
All right, well, I'll put the schedule together and I'll send it out to everyone so they have it, and then just let everyone know what we have to hand out. So,
And I
and
think,
anything you want to bring or add? I think in the past we've had a live turtle from Will Finch, and we had a wetland in a bottle from myself,
Hmm.
and what else have we had? And then we did the raffle a lot. One time I was going to do a solar oven, but then I found out that I needed to get health department to sign off, so I gave up on that idea.
Hmm.
And when you had a raffle, what was raffled off?
Plants, native plants.
I remember last year, Anika had them in her yard and she delivered them to people after the town day was over. She didn't bring them to, well, maybe she brought them to town day to show off, but then delivered them a week later or something like that. I don't feel I have the time in my schedule to go shopping for native plants to put into a raffle. So I'm if somebody else wants to organize that, I'm happy to let them, but it's not something I'm gonna take on.
Or is there anything else we could think of as an alternative to that, that wouldn't take as much bandwidth and might be attractive? I mean, for example, days past at Arnold Arboretum or something like that. Does any of that make any sense to you?
Arnold Arboretum is free, so that wouldn't help.
Well, then it's easy for us to raffle that off.
But you know, it could be, you know, a membership to Mass Audubon or a entrance fee to something else, but again, that's also not something I have the bandwidth for right now.
Let's just go with the clipboard for now. And we if something comes up, Brian, you think about something, there's still a few weeks to put that together. I mean, isn't there yeah, I think there's a garden club plant sale, either coming up soon or,
I think that was on the 20th.
okay, we missed that or just passed.
Okay. All right. In terms of minutes for approval, Andrew sent his out a couple of days ago. John, I think we just got today. So wonderful for both of you. We've got those produced now. And who was doing the 10th? Was that Chuck?
Yeah,
Okay. And are those not yet ready for distribution?
they are not ready for distribution.
Okay. And I also learned at the open meeting law, public records law training that we are supposed to vote on our minutes within 30 days or 3 meetings, whichever is longer. So Chuck still has a couple of meetings available before we have run into that deadline, but the January and February minutes, we certainly exceeded what was supposed to be the limit. So glad to have them done.
So what happens if you're over the limit?
I don't know, maybe they slap the back of our hand.
Okay, so they didn't cover that?
They didn't tell us the consequences.
I can tell you the consequences. Somebody has to actually bring a complaint. Remember, the public would actually have to bring a complaint to the office that they weren't in on time, and then they'd open an investigation, and then comes the hand slapping. And usually with the open meeting law, it's in the form of all of you have to do training now. So that's what would have to happen.
Okay.
And just to put you, it is great, and Martha's absolutely right about this requirement. But I was on the MACC website. They have this board where people raised questions and one of them was from a town in which a member of the commission said, nobody has taken minutes for 2 years. And we're wondering how to address this problem. So, feel better.
What was the answer? It was unanswered, right?
It was answered, and that's really a question for town council.
Oh, wow.
So,
Yeah.
Actually, just to be specific, Chuck, the issue was they had been told by town council, you can't approve more recent minutes because you have so many that you haven't done, which I don't think is accurate. But again, it was just interesting that someone said, and it's a town you'd all recognize, I won't name it here, that 2 years without minutes. That's just astonishing. So.
Yeah, well, we used to have paid staff doing the minutes for us, and more than a year ago, that stopped happening, and we filled in the gap with volunteers from the commission to do the minutes. And so, I'm not going to feel bad if our volunteers from the commission occasionally get behind, because we're still pushing to get the town staff to be the ones who are picking that job back up.
I couldn't agree more, Martha. And also, I also note on the MACC board, people were asking for advice about staffing, and various towns were weighing in saying what staff they had. And there were a few that have note takers, part-time note takers in addition. So as you say, practices really do vary.
Yeah. Okay. So, I read over Andrew's minutes, which were January 25th. Did everybody else have a chance to read them? And can we vote on them today?
I have read them. I sent some really minor stuff to Andrew, so
I got 2 minor comments.
Bill and John, do you need more time before you are comfortable voting on those minutes? Should we wait till next meeting?
Oh, good news from me. I'll have to abstain on 125 and 222 because I wasn't on the commission until March.
Aha, there we go. John,
So that
what do you-
saves you.
Yeah, I think we should hold off till the next meeting.
Okay, so we'll give John a chance to read the January 25th minutes, and the rest of us all read the February 22nd minutes, and we'll vote on both of them on June 14th. And Brian still has a couple of meetings available. I mean, not Brian, Chuck has a couple of meetings available before we have to get his done. And Brian is doing minutes for tonight.
It's gonna be like 3 paragraphs.
And
There.
Brian and Andrew, can you send me your comments that you had for 125?
I could send you I already made the changes, so I'll just send you the new doc.
Okay.
And one other thing they said about the minutes is that we don't have to put down everything everyone said. We just have to put down basically the actions that we took. So some of us are writing more like transcripts rather than minutes. And that certainly is something I have been doing, but we don't have to be as thorough as that. So it's fine. It's not a thing we are not supposed to do. It's just we don't have to do that. So if we want our minutes to be briefer, we can simply do the votes and the conditions and that kind of thing, rather than the whole conversation that led to those votes. Okay. Do we have anything else?
One last minor thing, and that is just to be concrete, because I know it's helpful for me and I imagine for others. For those who are going to make additional proposed draft edits to or suggestions for the regs, correct me if I'm wrong, Chuck, but it'd be useful for you to have those by June 8th before the 14th meeting. That is, anybody who's going to make those suggestions, so you could sort of pull them together in one document. Right. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So Thursday, June 8th. Thanks.
And we should send those directly to Chuck and not do a joint email with all of us included on it. So, because that would be deliberation outside of the meeting. So if people have suggested wording, send it to Chuck and Chuck can put it up for us all to consider at the meeting. I believe that is the right way to do this. Walter is nodding his head.
Yeah, I was at that meeting yesterday as well. It's a good thing we have a lawyer on the commission.
Oh, Walter, when I occasionally send something, I will send it to Martha and Brian and just those two, because then it's not at the quorum level, but you're absolutely right. And if you thought that was complicated, you ought to, you'll eventually get the slide deck for part 2 of the riverfront regulations. And even the state expert after decades scratches their head at the way it was written. So.
Well, having attended meetings for years, the fact that we can no longer have new business discussed, I thought that was stunning.
We can have new business, we just have to specify what it is.
And then has to be available for public discussion before we can discuss it ourselves.
Speaking of which, Chuck, add SWAC to the next meeting. SWAC review.
Okay, good. Chuck, do you have that?
I do.
Okay,
I have a
thank you,
meeting.
Andrew, for bringing that up.
We have a meeting scheduled for next Tuesday, May 30th, and for those of you that haven't heard, the charge has expanded. So they're looking at the area bigger than was first considered, which includes area that's largely within our regulations. Not
Okay.
owned by us. So, well, I'd like to discuss that next week or next meeting.
All right, anything else we need to talk about before we adjourn? Okay, can I have a motion to adjourn?
This is Brian. I make a motion that we adjourn at 9:08.
Andy, I'll second that.
All right,
Right.
all in favor? Okay,
Unanimous.
Unanimous. Okay, thank you all and see
All
you in
right.
a couple of weeks.
Yep. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.